What if I told you that the difference between a millionaire and an average person isn't luck, talent, or even a high-paying job? What if it's just $5 a day? Most people spend $5 without thinking. A cup of coffee, a snack, another online purchase they won't even remember next week. It doesn't feel like much. But sometimes, the smallest decisions create the biggest futures. Today, I want to tell you the story of a young man whose life changed forever because he made one simple choice that almost everyone around him laughed at. His name was Ethan. He was 22 years old, working long hours at a small grocery store. His paycheck barely covered his rent, food, and bills. Every month ended the same way. His bank account was nearly empty, and his dreams felt farther away than ever. He wasn't lazy. He worked harder than most people he knew. Yet no matter how many hours he worked, he never seemed to get ahead. One evening, after finishing another exhausting shift, Ethan sat on a park bench watching people rush home. Some wore expensive suits. Others drove luxury cars. He wondered why their lives looked so different from his. Were they simply luckier? Did they know something he didn't? As he sat there thinking, an elderly man took a seat beside him. After a few minutes of silence, the old man smiled and asked, "Young man, what's troubling you?" Ethan sighed and said, "I work every day, but I never have enough money. I don't think my life will ever change." The old man nodded as if he had heard those words 1,000 times before. Then he asked a strange question. "Can you save $5 tomorrow?" Ethan laughed. $5? That's nothing." The old man smiled again. "If it's nothing, then save it." Ethan looked confused. "That's all." The old man stood up and said, "Small habits decide big futures." Then he walked away. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about those words. The next morning, instead of buying his usual coffee, he put $5 into a small glass jar. It felt strange. Almost meaningless. But he did the same thing the next day. And the day after that. His friends noticed. "Why are you being so cheap?" one of them laughed. "Come on, it's only $5. Sometimes Ethan felt embarrassed. Sometimes he almost gave up. But every time he reached for his wallet, he remembered the old man's words. Small habits decide big futures. Weeks turned into months. The glass jar slowly filled with money. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't just earning money. He was keeping some of it. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of spending the savings, Ethan bought books about money, investing, business, and successful habits. Every night after work, while everyone else watched television or scrolled endlessly through social media, Ethan spent 1 hour learning. At first, nothing changed. His paycheck stayed the same. His apartment stayed the same. His old car still broke down every few weeks. From the outside, his life looked exactly the same. But inside, his thinking was changing. He stopped asking, "How can I make more money?" Instead, he started asking, "How can I become more valuable?" That single question changed everything. He learned new skills. He took free online courses. He practiced communication. He learned sales. He learned how successful people solved problems instead of complaining about them. 1 year later, Ethan wasn't the same person anymore. Not because he had become rich overnight, but because he had become someone capable of creating opportunities instead of waiting for them. And that was the moment his real journey began. One afternoon, while working his usual shift at the grocery store, Ethan noticed an elderly customer struggling to carry several heavy bags to his car. Most people walked past without paying attention, but Ethan immediately stepped forward and offered to help. The old man smiled and thanked him. As they walked through the parking lot, they started talking. Ethan mentioned that he spent every evening reading books about business and personal finance because he wanted to build a better future. The old man looked surprised. "So you're investing in yourself," he said. Ethan nodded. "I'm trying. I don't know where it'll lead, but I know I can't stay where I am forever." Before driving away, the old man handed Ethan a business card. "I own a small company," he said. "We're looking for someone who's willing to learn. Come see me on Monday." Ethan stared at the card in disbelief. The following Monday, he walked into the office wearing his only suit. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean and neatly pressed. The interview lasted less than 30 minutes. The owner wasn't impressed by Ethan's experience. He wasn't impressed by his resume. He was impressed by his attitude. "You can teach skills," the owner said. "You can't teach hunger." Ethan got the job. The salary wasn't much higher than before, but he now had something even more valuable, a chance to grow. Every day he arrived early. He stayed late. He volunteered for difficult projects that everyone else avoided. Whenever he made a mistake, he wrote down what he had learned instead of making excuses. Months passed. Slowly, people began to notice. His manager trusted him with bigger responsibilities. His co-workers started asking him for advice. The same friends who once laughed at his $5 habit now asked him how he was getting promoted so quickly. Ethan simply smiled. It never started with the money, he said. It started with discipline. A few years later, Ethan had saved enough money to launch a small online business. The first month was a disaster. He made almost no sales. The second month wasn't much better. Every failure tempted him to quit. But he remembered something he had learned while pushing himself every single day. Success isn't built in one giant moment. It's built through hundreds of small decisions that nobody else notices. Instead of quitting, Ethan improved his website. He learned marketing. He studied successful businesses. He listened to customer feedback. Little by little, things began to change. One customer became 10. 10 became 100. 100 became 1,000. Years after placing that very first $5 into a glass jar, Ethan stood inside his own office looking out over a team of employees whose lives he was helping support. His income had changed. His lifestyle had changed. But the biggest change wasn't in his bank account. It was in his mindset. He finally understood that wealth isn't created by making one perfect decision. It's created by making the right small decision over and over again, especially on the days when nobody is watching. The years passed, and Ethan's small online business continued to grow. What had once been a dream on an old laptop slowly became a real company. He hired his first employee, then another, and before long, he had built a team of people who believed in the same vision. One morning, as Ethan walked into his office, he noticed something sitting on his desk. It was an old glass jar covered in dust. He smiled the moment he saw it. Inside the jar was the very first $5 bill he had decided to save years ago. He picked it up carefully and remembered the day an old stranger had told him, "Small habits decide big futures." At that moment, Ethan realized something powerful. The $5 had never made him wealthy. His discipline had. The money was only a symbol. The real investment had always been in himself. That afternoon, Ethan visited the same park where everything had started. He sat on the same bench, hoping to see the old man again. Hours passed. But the old man never came. Instead, another young man sat beside him. The young man looked tired, frustrated, and worried about his future. Ethan smiled because he recognized that expression. It was the same look he had worn years before. The young man sighed and said, "I work every day, but nothing ever changes." Ethan reached into his wallet, pulled out a $5 bill, and placed it in the young man's hand. Then he smiled and asked, "Can you save this tomorrow?" The young man looked confused. "Just $5? Ethan nodded. "If it's only $5, then it should be easy." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan stood up and walked away with a quiet smile. As he disappeared into the distance, the young man looked down at the $5 bill, wondering if that tiny piece of paper could really change his life. Maybe it could. Maybe it couldn't. The answer wasn't in the money. It never was. It was in the decision. Because success is rarely built by one giant opportunity. It is built by hundreds of small choices repeated every single day. Every great fortune begins with one small habit. Every confident person begins with one small act of courage. Every successful life begins with one decision to stop making excuses and start taking action. So ask yourself this question. What is your $5? What small habit could you start today that your future self will thank you for? Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you have more money. Don't wait until life becomes easier. Start today. Because one small decision can create a completely different future. And remember, your future is not created overnight. It is created one habit, one choice, and one day at a time.